Right?
Okay. Well, I'm not quite a science guy, but I...
You are today.
All right, I am today.
So what I did, this is a little different than what everybody else did, I think, because I started looking through my bookshelf, and it was like picking your favorite child. You know, what book do I discuss? What book do I discuss that doesn't have a political agenda behind it? What book do I discuss that doesn't make me pursue my point of view? What book is appropriate? And I couldn't pick. So I decided what I would do was kind of go through my journey, my literary journey, if you will, and point out some books that were important to me, some books that were significant in my life. And so that's what I've got here. I've got a small I have a lot of books. And this is a small collection. And as I look, you know, I think about it. The book, of course, that's the most important, the one that I read the longest, is the Bible.
Hi there. Come on in.
Hey there.
Let's get them started.
Okay.
And I'm leaving at 11 o'clock because I got to
Yeah, we heard you had
So, you know, the Bible is the one that I've been in the longest and the deepest for the most years.
Uh-huh.
But I like to read the Old Testament from the Jewish Bible because each interpretation, each translation of the Bible is really an interpretation. And so when you read the Jewish scriptures, it's not interpreted by a Christian viewpoint, it's interpreted by a Jewish viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of my favorites is Psalm 20. I'm going to read a little bit from some of these books, just to give you a little flavor. I said I couldn't pick my favorite child, so I'm going to give you the whole...
Okay.
This is the journey of Dan's mind. Okay? This is Psalm 25, verse 4. Let me know your paths, O Lord. Teach me your ways. Guide me in your true way and teach me. For you are God, my deliverer. It is you I look to at all times. O Lord, be mindful of your compassion and your faithfulness. They are as old as time. If you look at that in the NIV, it's show me your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. Remember, O Lord, your great mercy and love, for they are from old. Subtle differences, but sometimes very important differences. So another one of my favorite passages is John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God, and He was God in the beginning. And then later the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. We have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So just so you know that other scriptures are important to me, there are two other scriptures that I spend time in. One is the Bhagavad Gita, and there's a beautiful passage in this that says, a man finds success by worshiping with his own right actions the one from whom all actions arise and by whom the world is pervaded. It is better to do your own duty badly than to perfectly do another's. When you do your duty, you are naturally free.
I'm sorry.
This is the Bhagavad Gita. It's a Vedic text of Hindu scripture.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Barbara.
There's also the Upanishads and some other scriptures that I enjoy reading.
Okay.
Here's the Quran. And there's a passage that I love in the Quran. Remember, the Muslims refer to God as Allah. Mm-hmm. So this is a passage from chapter 4, verse 36. It says, to serve Allah, ascribe nothing as partner unto Him. Show kindness unto parents and into near kindred, and orphans, and the needy, and unto the neighbor who is kin, and the neighbor who is not of kin, and the fellow traveler, and the wayfarer, and the slaves whom your right hand possesses. Lo, Allah loveth not such as are proud and boastful. So, in the Quran, we see some texts that are strikingly familiar to love your neighbor as yourself in our Bible. I'm going through books from my life.
Wonderful. That's great.
So, have you looked in the Quran before, or the Gita, or the?
I'll never think around.
Only when I went to Islam 101 out of the...
Oh, at the Muslim Center?
Yeah.
Cool.
That was the first time I'd ever opened.
I wanted to go there. It's on Wednesday night, right?
Yeah.
So I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't really important in my life. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this book. One of my favorite parts of this book is a prayer that surrounds the third step. The third step is we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. And there's a prayer, a beautiful prayer that goes with that. It says, God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. That certainly has been a big part of my life. You can see some of these books are a little ragged.
Well worn. Well dressed.
Okay, moving on. Let's see. There's a book that was also really important to me called The Spirituality of Imperfection. It's written by a man named Ernest Kurtz, who was a friend of mine, lived in Ann Arbor, passed away 5 or so years ago. And one of my favorite quotes of his is, spirituality is one of those realities that you have only so long as you seek it. As soon as you think you have it, you've lost it. In rediscovering this basic spiritual insight, the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous tapped the essence of open-endedness that characterizes the spirituality of imperfection. Spirituality is boundless, unable to be fenced in. We do not capture it, it captures us. As much as we might like to wrap things up, to lock spirituality in and hold it fast, it will forever escape our grasp. This is a book. Anybody seen The Spirituality of Imperfection before? It's a collection of stories. It's the subtitle is Storytelling in the Search for Meaning. It's a collection of beautiful stories. And here's one. This book retells over 100 stories. The stories that tell spirituality story. They come to us first by hearing. Some stories we first heard in school or in church. Others were told by loved grandparents or favorite aunts or uncles. And others, as we grow older, were shared by friends or acquaintances. Let me just read you one of these as an example. This is on a chapter on gratitude. A blind man was begging in a city park. Someone approached and asked him whether people were giving generously. The blind man shook a nearly empty tin. His visitor said to him, "Let me write something on your card." And the blind man agreed. That evening the visitor returned. "Well, how are things today?" The blind man showed him a tin full of money and asked, "What on earth did you write on the card?" "Oh," said the other, "I merely wrote, 'Today is a spring day and I am blind.'" The next book is, I'm going through the books of my life. Instead of deep, I'm going broad. The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck.
Oh, yeah.
Have you all read this?
I haven't read it.
Okay. Some of the important quotes from this book are, "Share our similarities and celebrate our differences." It is only because of problems that we grow mentally and spiritually.
That's so hard to remember, but it's so important.
And here's a chapter again on grace. But what is this force that pushes us as individuals and as a whole species to grow against the natural resistance of our own lethargy? We have labeled it. It is love. Love is defined as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. When we grow, it is because we are working on it, and we are working on it because we love ourselves. It is through our love that we elevate ourselves. And it is through our love for others that we assist others to elevate themselves. Love, the extension of the self, is the very act of evolution. It is the evolution in progress. The evolutionary force present in our life manifests itself in mankind as human love. Among humanity, love is the miraculous force that defies the natural law of entropy. He's got a couple other books. Now, anybody seen The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer? I don't know when I started reading this book, but I've been through this. There's all kinds of colored ink. He was a minister, and he wrote this book in 1948. And he speaks of the difficulties in the world at that time, and that searching after God was the solution to all of these issues. I could read the whole book. The desire to worship God and to inspire others to a deeper awareness of God are clearly evident in the pursuit of God. To the person thirsting for the things of God without distracting and embellishment, this book will become a faithful companion. There are some books that can be enjoyed with one reading, others are enhanced by many readings. This book is one of the latter. I really don't know what to... A loving God can be known in personal experience. A loving personality dominates the Bible, walking through the trees of the garden and breathing fragrance over every scene. We possess spiritual faculties by which we can know God in the spiritual world if we obey the Spirit's urge and begin to use them. Very decades ago, I started reading this. And as I look through these books, I need to read some of these again. That led to us early on. That led to a series of books that were that I don't have here because there's just too much to go through. The Variety of Religious Experience by William James. The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. You read that, Bob?
I've read that.
Fractals, Chaos, and Power Laws. We're getting into some deep water here. Gold, Escher, and Bach by Douglas Hofstadter.
Yes, he wrote that when he was here at Michigan, I think.
Did he? Mm-hmm. What a marvelous book. What a journey.
Different way of thinking.
Yeah. And then another one that's become really important along the same kind of group is one called Thank God for Evolution, which is really a book that talks about, anybody seen this one? By William Dowd. It's really...
What's the last name?
William Dowd, D-O-W-D.
Okay.
Thank God for Evolution is the most heartfelt love letter to the human race. It is the ultimate guide towards the most profound physiological interaction in human history, the confluence of the truly cosmic and the truly personal. After this reading, one is invited to the timeless technicolor of the great story, the story that lovingly belongs and holds us. It is the alpha and omega brought up to date. It's an evolution that brings the science and spirituality together. And that is my life. Anybody familiar with Pierre Teilhard de Chardin?
The name.
The name. The Divine Milieu. Really interesting. Another book that's kind of beat up. And partly because that book is difficult and thick, Louis Savory wrote a number of books that deal with helping us through the divine milieu. But he also wrote some books that walk through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And this one has been important to me as well. The basic principles, I can't read them all, but the discoveries of modern science must form an important foundation to any contemporary spirituality if it is to be true, relevant, and inspiring. Evolution is happening continually on the level of being, and it has a direction. The law of attraction, connection, complexity, and consciousness is the law that is giving evolution its direction. And he says evolution is based primarily on spirit, not matter. Another really good book to look into. I'm running out of time. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a book like Rory Nolan's Heart of the Artist, which is bringing together music and artistic talents with spirituality. He talks a little bit about perfectionism is more or less the evil twin of excellence. What next? I'm not even going to be able to talk about things like The Practice of the Presence of God, which is written by Brother Lawrence, a monk. You know this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful little book
Yeah.
that he speaks of. I'd love to read the whole first letter. He really talks, it's his common practice ever since he entered religion to sit and be still in everything that he does. He was a dishwasher in the monastery, and he found that washing dishes was a meditative practice that brought him closer to God. I'm not going to talk about Brennan Manning or Richard Rohr, although they're really important to me. I will touch base a little bit on Brennan Manning. This and this book, Open Mind and Open Heart by Thomas Keating. Are you familiar with Thomas Keating?
Irish writer?
Yeah. He was responsible, along with a man named Basil Pennington, for bringing back centering prayer as a practice within the Catholic and Christian community. Centering prayer is an effort to renew the teaching of the Christian tradition on contemplative prayer. It is an attempt to present the tradition in an up-to-date and certain order and method with it. In other words, sitting quietly in prayer. You know, sometimes I think we spend a lot of our time talking to God. God, we want, and then spend very little time listening to the answer. And I have this vision of God going, maybe tomorrow you'll wait for my answer. Centering prayer has been very important to slow me down. So that, Open Mind, Open Heart, and Brennan Manning's Abba's Child are two books that I've given away more copies of than any of them. As we end, we began in poetry, and I'd like to end in poetry. Four of my favorite poets are St. John of the Cross, who wrote Dark Night of the Soul. Familiar with St. John and Teresa? One dark night, fired with love's urgent longings. Ah, the sheer grace. I went out unseen, my house now being all still. He's the one, and it goes on. So, John of the Cross, Mary Oliver, David White and Thomas Merton are my favorite poets right now. So let me just share a couple from Mary Oliver. This one's called Praying. It doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot, or a few small stones. Just pay attention, then patch a few words together and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but the doorway to thanks, in a silence in which another's voice may speak. And another one by her is, hello, sun in my face. Hello, you who make the morning and spread it over the fields, and into the faces of the tulips and the nodding morning glories, and into the windows of even the miserable and the crotchety. Best preacher that ever was, dear star, that just happens to be where you are in the universe, to keep us from ever darkness, to ease us with warm touching, to hold us in the bright hands of light. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Watch now as I start the day in happiness and in kindness. So we started with poetry in Psalms, and we end with poetry. And here's one from David White. This is called Sometimes. Sometimes if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories, who could cross the shimmering bed of dry leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests. Conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to feed everywhere. Requests that stop you doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. And that is all I have time. So one thing I want you to notice is that in all these books, God is in all of them. In each and every one of them.
Thank you very much.
Because it makes